Episode 1. The First Whisper. I was 12 years old the first time I heard it. That sound rising from the lake, like a voice made of water and breath. The villagers called our lake Santa Lucia. They said it was blessed once, that its waters had healed the sick and softened the soil for crops. But that was before the whispers began, before children started to vanish. That night, the air was heavy with fog, and I remember standing by my window, watching the pale shimmer of the lake beneath the moon. My friend, Mateo, lived just across the path. He was older than me by 2 years, braver, reckless. When I saw his shadow creeping outside toward the shore, I felt a chill slide down my spine. I called out his name, but he didn't hear me, or maybe he didn't want to. The whisper reached me then, low, almost tender, like a mother humming a lullaby, but the words were wrong, twisted, syllables I couldn't place. And yet somehow I recognized them. They shaped themselves into Mateo's name, slowly, purposefully. Mateo. I pressed my face against the glass, my breath fogging the pain. He froze at the edge of the water, as if waiting for something to rise and take his hand. The lake rippled, though there was no wind. A sound almost like laughter echoed in the fog. I wanted to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. All I could do was watch. Mateo stepped forward, one foot, then the other. The water swallowed his legs, then his waist. He didn't struggle. His eyes stayed locked on something only he could see. The voice grew louder. It was no longer coming from the lake. It was coming from inside the water itself. Each ripple carried it. Each bubble breathed it. Mateo, come home. His head tilted back, his lips moving as though answering. And then, with one last ripple, the lake closed over him. The fog swallowed everything. The silence that followed was worse than the whisper. At dawn, the villagers found his clothes drifting near the shore, neatly folded, as if placed by unseen hands. No trace of him remained, not even his footprints. The adults muttered of accidents, of children wandering too close to deep waters. But I had seen the truth. I knew the lake had called his name, and I knew one night it would call mine. Episode 2. The Drowned Names. They said Mateo's death was an accident. They said boys wander, boys drown, and grief makes children like me imagine things that aren't there. But the voice did not stop. It began again 3 nights later, just after the village bells rang midnight. The fog rolled thick over the lake, and through that curtain of gray, I heard it, stronger this time, clearer. The whisper did not come as a song now. It came as a roll call. Lucia. The name echoed across the water, sinking deep into the earth beneath my feet. My neighbor's daughter, barely 8 years old, sat upright in her bed, eyes glazed, her tiny hands trembling as if answering some invisible command. By morning, Lucia was gone. The villagers found her ribbon tied to a branch by the shore, the color bright as blood against the mist. The next night, it happened again. Don Rafael, an old man, half blind and frail, woke screaming. He clutched his chest as if something were pulling his heart straight from within. His daughter begged him not to leave the house, but when dawn came, his cane floated beside the reeds, and the waters smelled faintly of iron. I could not sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the trees, I feared the voice would shape my name. I began to cover my ears with pillows, but the sound slithered through anyway, inside, beneath, between the bones. By the 4th night, the entire village gathered in the chapel. Candles burned until the air grew thick with wax and smoke. The priest prayed loudly, trying to drown out the whispers. Yet even as his voice trembled with psalms, the lake answered, Isabel. The candles went out in a single breath. The people gasped, clutching each other in the dark. And when the light returned, Isabel, the baker's wife, was gone. Only her rosary remained on the pew, its silver cross wet, dripping as if it had just been pulled from the depths. The villagers could no longer deny it. The lake was not a place of blessing. It was a mouth, hungry and calling, one name at a time. And I was cursed to be its witness. For on the 7th night, the whisper changed. It did not call a name immediately. It paused, dragging out the silence until it hurt to breathe. Then slowly, with a voice like water spilling over stone, it shaped the syllables. Not mine, not yet. But it was close. Mateo's brother. The villagers turned toward his younger sibling, a boy barely 6 years old. His mother clutched him tight, screaming that he would not be taken. But the child's eyes were glassy, his lips moving silently in time with the voice. That was when I realized the horror. The lake did not always speak the truth of names. It spoke how we were known, and sooner or later, it would whisper something that belonged only to me. Episode 3, The Girl Who Returned. We buried empty coffins. That was the only way the village could pretend the lake had not stolen them. Wooden boxes lowered into the earth, filled with nothing but stones, while mothers wept and fathers clenched their fists in silence. But sometimes the lake gave something back. It was nearly 2 weeks after Lucia vanished when the church bells tolled without reason. The villagers gathered at the square, whispering, crossing themselves. And then we saw her. Lucia. She stood at the edge of the path, hair dripping as though she had just stepped out of the water, though the lake was miles from where she appeared. Her nightdress clung to her frame, heavy and dark with damp. Her little feet left no mud, no footprints, only drops, clear as tears. Her mother screamed her name and rushed forward. The girl's head tilted, her eyes wide and strange, like glass marbles catching light but reflecting nothing. She smiled faintly, lips pale, and whispered a single word. Cold. The villagers surrounded her, half terrified, half relieved. The priest tried to bless her with trembling hands, but when the holy water touched her forehead, steam hissed into the air. I was standing near enough to hear it. The sound was faint but undeniable, not steam, but a voice carried within the hiss, a voice that did not belong to her. That night I could not keep away. Curiosity, terror, perhaps both, drew me to her house. I hid beneath her window, the wood damp with evening dew. Inside, her parents tucked her into bed as though nothing had changed. But the moment they blew out the candle and the room fell silent, I heard it. Not Lucia's voice, the lake, speaking through her. The same whisper that had called Matteo, the same tone that had rolled across the waters. But now it came from the fragile lips of a child who should have been dead. It murmured names, some I recognized, some I did not. The words slithered, soaking through the walls, winding into my ears until I could hardly tell if they were spoken aloud or crawling in my mind. I pressed my hands over my mouth to keep from screaming. The girl's body shifted under the sheets, twitching with every syllable. Her eyes flickered open, glowing faintly in the dark, and for a moment, God help me, I swear they turned toward the window, toward me. I ran before she could finish. The next day, her parents claimed Lucia was silent, that she remembered nothing. But the villagers whispered behind their backs. Some swore she was a blessing, proof that God had power even over the lake. Others believed the opposite, that she was no longer Lucia at all, but a vessel. I knew which was true, because that night when I tried to sleep, I heard her voice through the thin walls of my room, a whisper soft yet sharp as broken glass, and it spoke my name. Episode 4, The Lantern Ritual. When the dead began to return in broken forms, the elders decided we must appease the lake. They said the whispers were not curses but hungers, and hunger could sometimes be satisfied. So they planned a ritual. On the night of the new moon, every family was told to craft a lantern. Paper, wood, whatever hands could manage. Each lantern would carry a prayer, written on slips of parchment, sealed with wax and hope. At midnight, we would set them afloat, offering light to guide restless souls back to silence. I remember the feverish work in the days before. Old women scribbled psalms with shaking hands. Children dipped brushes into ink they could barely control. My mother wrote only one thing: protect my son. She folded it carefully, pressing it into the thin walls of our lantern as though the words themselves could hold me back from the water's edge. That night, the entire village gathered by the shore. Hundreds of lanterns flickered, their flames trembling in the breathless dark. The lake was still, black as polished stone, waiting. The priest raised his arms and spoke of peace, of forgiveness, of guiding light. His words shook, but the people clung to them like children clinging to the hem of a cloak. Then, one by one, they set the lanterns adrift. For a moment it was beautiful. A river of fire drifted across the lake, mirrored in the black surface, turning night into something holy. But beauty never lasted there. The first lantern stopped moving. It quivered, then tilted, as if someone beneath had caught it. The flame did not sputter. It spoke. A whisper coiled out of it, soft as breath against glass. "Matteo!" Gasps broke through the crowd. More lanterns halted. More whispers slithered free. Each flame flickered in time with the voice. Lucia, Isabel, Raphael. The names of the drowned, the names of the stolen. The villagers backed away, their prayers falling into chaos. Mothers pressed their hands over their children's ears, but the whispers crawled through cloth and flesh alike. I could not move. My lantern drifted further out, its flame fragile, wavering. Then it spoke too. Not my name, not yet, but my mother's voice, her prayer. Protect my son. The words twisted, mocked, stretched into something cruel. The lantern's flame darkened to blue, and in its glow I saw faces, bloated, pale, eyes open wide with waterless screams. The priest hurled his cross into the lake, but instead of sinking, it floated upside down. The whispers roared in unison, spilling from every lantern at once, until the water itself seemed to tremble with laughter. And then, as suddenly as it began, silence. The lanterns were gone, every single one pulled beneath. The lake returned to its black stillness, as though nothing had ever touched it. But when the wind carried across the shore, it smelled not of water, nor earth, but of smoke and burnt flesh. Episode 5. The Silent Diver. The lake had taken children, mothers, and even prayers, but no one had dared to go down and see what lay beneath. No one, until him. His name was Esteban, a diver. A man with lungs like iron and a gaze that had stared into the black belly of the sea itself. He had traveled through ports and storms, pulling treasure from shipwrecks, dragging drowned men back to shore. When he arrived in our village, he laughed at the stories. He spat in the dirt and said, "Water is only water. Fear is the only demon." The villagers begged him not to try. The priest warned that the lake was not made of water alone, but of voices. Esteban only grinned, flashing teeth like a wolf, and promised to return with proof that our terrors were nothing but shadows. That night the fog came heavy, and Esteban walked to the shore with ropes and weights. I followed, though my legs trembled with every step. I needed to see. I needed to know if the lake's curse could be broken. He strapped the rope around his chest, the other end tied to a heavy oak post. "Count my minutes," and he said, "and when the rope shakes twice, pull me back." I nodded, though my throat was dry. He slipped into the water, silent, without a splash, as though the lake had swallowed him whole with eager lips. The rope slithered between my fingers as he sank. 1 minute, 2, 3. I felt my heart pounding louder than the crickets in the reeds. The fog pressed closer, muting the world, until all I could hear was my own breath and the faint hum of a voice beneath the surface. Then the rope jerked, once, hard. I froze. That wasn't the signal. Another pull, then another, irregular, desperate. My palms burned as the rope tightened, strained, as though something below was yanking it from my hands. I shouted his name. "Esteban!" No answer, only bubbles rising, bursting, carrying with them faint syllables like whispers torn apart by air. The rope snapped. The sound was sharp, final. The oak post cracked in two and the coil recoiled into the water, vanishing with him. I fell to my knees, clutching at empty space. The lake rippled once, then smoothed itself like glass. Not a single sign of him remained. That night, when the whispers came, they were louder than ever, and they had changed. They no longer sounded like strangers, or even the drowned. They sounded like him. "Bajo, más abajo, come deeper." It was Esteban's voice, calling not just the names of the villagers, but beckoning them, urging them, as if he had joined whatever chorus lived beneath the waves. And when the villagers awoke to his voice in the fog, they believed him. They believed he had found something down there. And some of them began to wonder, should they follow? Episode 6. The Broken Cross. The morning after Esteban vanished, the villagers gathered by the shore, desperate for signs of him. They found none. No body, no rope. No trace of the diver who had sworn that fear was the only demon. But something else was waiting for us. At the far edge of the lake stood a wooden cross, weathered but steadfast, hammered into the soil by our grandfathers. It had been planted there after the first drowning decades ago, a silent plea for protection. For as long as I remembered, it leaned slightly toward the water, as though keeping watch. That morning it was split down the middle. The break was clean, unnatural, like something had torn it apart from within. The villagers gasped, some crying out, others crossing themselves so quickly their hands shook. The priest fell to his knees, clutching the broken wood as though trying to hold the faith of an entire village together. But the whispers came anyway. They curled up from the lake like steam, wrapping around us, sliding into our ears, our mouths, our bones. And this time, they weren't content to call names. They mocked. Your cross cannot hold us. Your prayers sink like stones. I felt the sound more than I heard it, vibrating in my ribs, my teeth. I pressed my palms to my ears, but the words were inside me now, crawling under my skin. The priest shouted, his voice cracking, "In the name of God, be gone!" He lifted what was left of the cross above his head. But before the words were finished, the wood splintered in his hands. Shards flew, slicing his palms, and the blood dripped onto the dirt. The whispers hissed with laughter, and then silence. The villagers scattered back to their homes, slamming doors, shuttering windows. But I stayed. I couldn't move. My eyes were fixed on the lake, where the broken halves of the cross floated outward, drifting like lost ships. They did not sink. They drifted until the fog swallowed them whole. That night the voice returned with venom. It no longer called gently. It thundered. It named the priest. I watched from my window as Father Gabriel staggered out into the dark, clutching his bleeding hands. His prayers were loud, desperate, flung against the sky. The fog swallowed him at the edge of the water, and when the voice answered, it was his own voice, mocked, distorted, twisted. The next morning the church bells rang by themselves, though the tower was empty. The villagers found no trace of Father Gabriel. Only his blood-stained stole lay at the foot of the altar, damp, smelling faintly of the lake. From that day on, no one dared pray aloud by the shore. And when I tried to whisper a prayer into my pillow, I swore I heard it repeated back to me, not by God, but by the lake itself. Episode 7, The Confession in Water. I had always believed the whispers belonged to others. Mateo, Lucia, Father Gabriel. The lake had taken them because it wanted them, not me, never me. But the night it called my name, I learned how wrong I was. It began with a sound no louder than a sigh. I was lying in bed staring at the ceiling when the window fogged, though there was no breath, no wind. And in the mist, the voice slithered through. Child of the lie. Not my name, not yet. Just a wound I thought was buried. I sat up, trembling, whispering a prayer under my breath. The floorboards creaked as if answering, and then, clearer, colder. You. The syllable scraped along my bones. I pressed my hands to my ears, but the voice seeped in like water through cracks. It spoke of things I had never confessed. The fight with my father before he died. The curse I had spat under my breath. The shame that kept me awake at night. It named each one, syllable by syllable, peeling me open like rotten fruit. By dawn, I could not bear it. I ran to the chapel, though it stood hollow since the priest's disappearance. The pews smelled of mildew, the altar stained by his bloodied stole. I fell to my knees, clutching the stone floor until my nails split. I confess, I screamed. I confess everything. And the lake listened. I swear the water rippled, though I was nowhere near its edge. A wet hush swept through the chapel, and suddenly I was drowning, yet no water touched me. The whispers wrapped around my throat, filling my lungs, my mouth. I choked on words that were not mine, spilling secrets I had never spoken aloud. I wanted him gone, I wanted him gone. The words echoed through the empty nave. I realized then, it wasn't forgiveness the lake sought, it was fuel. Our sins were its sustenance, each confession feeding the voice until it swelled larger, hungrier. That night, the villagers heard me. My cries carried beyond the chapel walls, across the square, into every shuttered home. By morning, they looked at me not as a child, but as a marked thing. Mothers pulled their children close, men averted their eyes, because the whispers had exposed me. And yet, part of me felt lighter. The voice had dragged my secrets into the open, and though it hurt, though it humiliated, the weight of silence was gone. But in that emptiness, something new took root. A seed, a thread of the voice itself. When I opened my mouth to speak, even in a whisper, it was not always my own voice that came out. Sometimes it was deeper, liquid, carrying the rhythm of the lake. And sometimes, when I passed by others, they froze, because they swore they heard me confess sins I had never known. Episode 8, The Bride Beneath. Every village has a story older than memory, whispered only when the lamps are low. Ours was about La Novia del Lago, the bride of the lake. They said she was once a young woman, veiled and radiant, who vanished on her wedding day. Some swore her husband to be betrayed her, others that her family cursed her union. But all the stories ended the same. She walked into the lake in her white dress, never to return. I had always dismissed it as a tale told to frighten children, until the whispers began to change. One evening, as the fog rolled thick, I heard the voice hum, not the usual rasp of water through stone, but something softer, almost mournful. A melody, the kind a bride might sing to calm herself before stepping to the altar. And then, a name. Belaine. The villagers gasped. Belaine was soon to be married, her dress already stitched, her veil waiting. That night, her mother locked her inside, bolting the doors, praying the lake could not breach wood and iron. But when dawn came, Belaine's bed was empty, her veil gone. The whispers grew louder that day, filling every street. They no longer sounded like a chorus of the drowned. They sounded like one woman's voice, aching, grieving, begging for company. The elders decided to unseal the crypt. Beneath the chapel lay a coffin said to hold the bones of the drowned bride, buried there long ago to keep her spirit at rest. The air was heavy as the men pried the lid open. It was empty, no bones, no fabric, only water pooled inside, still and black, though the coffin had been sealed for decades. A silence fell so heavy it pressed against our chests. Then, from the water in the coffin, a whisper rose. Not alone. The men staggered back, making the sign of the cross, their faces pale. That night, the villagers claimed they saw her. A figure in white drifting across the lake's surface, veil trailing behind like mist, her hands outstretched. Some swore her face was beautiful, others that it was nothing but a hollow skull. I did not want to see her, but I did. From my window I watched her glide toward the shore, her veil snagged on the reeds, her dress rippling though there was no wind. And as she drew closer, her voice pressed into my mind. "You will walk with me." I tore myself from the window, slamming the shutters closed. My breath came ragged, my body trembling. The next morning, Belaine's veil was found on the church steps, soaked, heavy as if dragged from the lake itself. Her family wept, but no one searched. We knew the truth. The bride had claimed her, and worse, she was still searching for more. Episode 9, The Inverted Reflection. I had stopped looking at the lake. I thought if I kept my eyes from its surface, if I refused its pull, I might survive. But the lake has a way of finding you even when you turn away. It began with the mirrors. One morning, as I washed my face, I glanced into the basin of water. For a moment, I did not see myself. The eyes staring back were mine, but upside down, mouth above, eyes below, grinning in a way I never had. I splashed the basin across the floor, heart racing. My mother scolded me, but I said nothing. That evening, the whispers returned. Not from the lake, not from the coffin of the bride, but from every reflective surface. Glass, polished metal, even puddles after rain. They all carried me, but not as I was. When I finally dared return to the lake shore, I thought the reflection would be safe, ordinary. I leaned forward, hands trembling, breath misting the water. At first it was only my face, pale, tired, haunted. Then the ripples stilled, and it smiled. I hadn't. My lips were pressed tight, my jaw clenched, but in the lake my mouth curved upward, wide and cruel. The eyes in the water blinked slower than mine, deliberate, watching me with a hunger that was not my own. Then it whispered, "That is who you are." The voice wasn't like before, not drifting from the depths. It came through my reflection, mouth moving in time with the words. My knees buckled. I stumbled back, but the water did not break. The inverted version of me leaned forward, closer, pressing its palm against the surface as though it could step through. I screamed and ran. That night, I dared not sleep. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw its grin burned against the darkness. When dawn finally came, I thought I was safe. I walked to the village square, trying to breathe, trying to forget. Then I saw the well. Its surface was black still. Against my will, I looked down. There it was again, my reflection, smiling, head tilted unnaturally, lips whispering without sound. The more I stared, the louder the words grew in my skull, until I could finally hear them clear. Confess or become. I staggered back, nearly falling. The villagers stared, but I could not tell them. How could I explain that the lake had stolen my face? That night I covered every mirror in the house, but when I lay in bed, I felt it watching me still, from the darkness beyond the shutter, from the sheen of water in the cracks of the floor. I knew then what the whispers meant. The lake wasn't just hungry for bodies. It was hungry for me, for the self I tried to bury. And the longer I refused to face it, the more that smiling thing would rise in my place. Episode 10, The Hollow Sunday. For weeks, the chapel stood empty. Since Father Gabriel's disappearance, no one dared step inside. The altar gathered dust. The bells swayed in silence. Faith was a cracked vessel, and no one had the courage to drink from it anymore. But then came Sunday. The elders insisted the Mass be held again, as it always had, lest the village fall entirely into despair. One prayer spoken together, they said, is stronger than any whisper. The people nodded, but their eyes were hollow, their lips trembling. At dawn, the bells tolled. Their sound echoed across the water, dull and heavy, as if struck from beneath. We gathered in the chapel. The air was thick, heavy with the stink of damp wood and mildew. Candles were lit, their flames quivering though no draft stirred. I sat in the back pew, my hands cold, my throat dry. An old friar from a neighboring town stood at the altar, his voice shaking as he began the liturgy. The villagers answered in a murmur, weak but desperate. For a moment it felt almost normal, voices weaving together, rising like fragile wings. Then the echo began. It was faint at first, a second rhythm beneath the friar's voice. Each prayer spoken aloud returned distorted, dragged through water, syllables stretched and broken. The friar spoke, "Deliver us from evil." The echo replied, "Deliver us into the deep." Gasps rippled through the pews. Mothers clutched their children. Men glanced toward the doors, but no one moved. The friar pressed on, louder now, as though volume might drown it out. But the louder he prayed, the louder the echo became, until it was no longer echo at all. It was the lake itself speaking with our voices. Every psalm, every hymn, twisted. The choir of whispers swelled until the walls shook. And then, as if struck by an unseen wind, every candle went out. Darkness. In that blackness, I heard it clearly. Hundreds of voices layered into one. Some familiar, some lost. Mateo, Lucia, even Father Gabriel, all whispering in unison. Confess, kneel, join. The friar screamed, his voice breaking into sobs. Someone ran for the door, only to find it locked tight, though no hand had touched the bolt. The air grew wet, heavy, until droplets slid down the walls like tears. And then the hymn began. Not ours, theirs. A song rising from the floorboards, the stone, the very breath in our lungs. Our mouths moved without command, our throats tightening as though pulled by unseen strings. I tried to resist, but my lips parted, and I sang too, words in a language I did not know, a prayer that was no prayer at all. When the doors finally burst open, dawn spilling in, we collapsed onto the steps outside, gasping, shaking. Some wept, others clawed their own throats as if trying to tear the song from within. No one spoke of it, no one dared. But that Sunday was hollow, because when we tried to pray again, alone in our homes, we no longer heard silence after our words. We heard the lake answering. Episode 11, The Calling of the Dead. The Sunday hymn had not left us. It clung to our throats, lingered in the hollow of our lungs, humming even when we tried to breathe in silence. And then, days later, the dead began to answer. It started with a voice outside my window. At first I thought it was the wind, a low murmur threading through the shutters. But then I recognized it, my father's voice. He had been gone for years, lowered into the earth with prayers and tears. Yet now, there he was, whispering my name with the same rasp he carried before death claimed him. I wanted to believe it was a dream, until the neighbors began to speak. One by one, families admitted to hearing their dead. A brother calling for his sister, a mother humming her old lullaby, children laughing, the laughter of those drowned. The voices did not come from graves. They came from the lake, rolling over the water, carried by the fog like smoke. The villagers gathered at the shore, trembling, listening, and the dead spoke. They confessed secrets long buried. Raphael, the old man, admitted he had poisoned his brother's crops. Isabel, the baker's wife, whispered that she had prayed for her husband's death. Even children cried out sins that were never theirs, forced from their throats as though the lake had wrung them dry. The water rippled with every word, each confession sinking like stones into its depths. And as the sins grew louder, The voices grew stronger. It was no longer memory speaking. It was presence. The dead were not gone. They had been waiting beneath the surface, and now they had found their way back. That night, the village was restless. Lamps burned in every home, but no light could push away the fog. And then, just before dawn, the first body rose. Lucia. Her hair streamed with weeds, her dress bloated and torn, but her eyes were open. She staggered from the lake like a sleepwalker, her mouth spilling words that were not her own. Behind her came Matteo, his lips blue, his arms reaching. Then Raphael, Isabel, one after another. The drowned emerged, dripping silence, yet their voices filled the air. "Confess, confess, confess!" The villagers screamed, fled into their homes, bolting doors that would not keep spirits out. But I could not move. I stood frozen as the dead shuffled forward, their gazes empty, yet fixed. Their lips did not shape their words. The lake spoke through them, pulling sound from their hollow chests. And then I saw Esteban, the diver. His eyes were wide, his body waterlogged, but his voice was loudest of all. "Join us." The crowd scattered, but I knew there was nowhere to run, because the dead were no longer bound to the lake. They had come ashore, and they would not leave until every living voice in the village had been silenced, or turned into one of theirs. Episode 12, The Last Offering. The dead no longer slept. They wandered the edges of the village, their dripping feet leaving no mark in the dirt, their hollow voices filling every silence. No prayer could drown them, no door could bar them. The elders gathered in secret, faces pale in the flicker of candlelight. They spoke not of salvation, but of sacrifice. "The lake must be fed," one whispered. "It does not want prayers. It does not want lanterns. It wants flesh." The others nodded, too afraid to disagree. Their eyes roamed the room, searching for someone, anyone, to bear the burden. I felt their gaze pause on me, a weight like chains pressing against my skin. By morning, the decision had spread like fire through dry reeds. A life would be offered, willingly or not. The village square filled with murmurs, with the clamor of fear disguised as faith. Mothers clutched their children. Men muttered about sins unconfessed. Everyone was desperate to believe the lake would spare them, if only one was chosen. When the sun fell, the torches lit the path to the shore. The villagers walked in silence, their eyes fixed on the black water. And in the fog, the voices waited. "Confess. Kneel. Join." They surrounded me before I could run. Hands gripped my arms, rough, trembling. My mother wept, begging them to choose another, but her voice was drowned by the hiss of whispers rising from the lake. "It wants him," someone shouted. "The boy who hears it. The boy it speaks through." The crowd roared in fearful agreement. And in that moment, I knew the truth. I had never been a witness. I had been marked from the beginning. They bound my wrists with rope, dragging me toward the water's edge. The fog curled around us, thick as breath. The lake rippled, eager. I tried to scream, but the voice filled my throat. My lips parted against my will, spilling words I had never meant to speak. "I confess, I am yours." The villagers gasped, some crossing themselves, others shoving me forward. My knees struck the mud, the cold seeping into my bones. The water lapped against my skin like fingers. Then silence. The whispers ceased, every voice swallowed. Even the dead who lingered at the tree line bowed their heads, waiting. The lake spoke with one voice. "Enter." I stared into the black surface, my reflection grinning back, though I did not smile. And for the first time, I understood. The offering was not meant to appease the lake. It was meant to crown it, to bind it to a voice it had chosen. Mine. The rope slipped from my wrists as if cut by unseen hands. The villagers stepped back, trembling. Some cried out in relief, others in horror. I rose to my feet, the water now parting for me. The fog bent, curling like smoke around my body. And when I opened my mouth, it was not me who spoke. It was the lake. Episode 13, The Mirror Underwater. The night they tried to offer me to the lake, I did not drown. The water welcomed me. It folded around my body like silk, pulling me deeper. Yet I felt no panic, no need for air. The further I sank, the quieter the whispers became, until silence wrapped me tighter than the rope had. And then I saw it. A light glimmered far below, faint as moonlight through glass. I drifted toward it, drawn without choice. As I descended, the shapes of the drowned appeared around me. Matteo, Lucia, Isabel, faces pale, eyes wide. but none of them reached for me. They floated still, their mouths shut, as if waiting. The light grew, not a flame, not a star, a reflection. At the bottom of the lake stood a mirror. It stretched wide as a cathedral gate, its frame carved from stone and bone, its surface rippling yet clear. And staring back at me from within was not my reflection as I knew it. It was the other me. The one I had seen before in pools and windows, upside down, grinning with a hunger I could not name. Now it stood tall and proud, lips curling into a smile that belonged to me, but never had. "Welcome," it said. The voice was mine, layered with hundreds more, echoing through the water. I tried to speak, but no sound left me, only bubbles rising like lost prayers. The mirror me stepped closer, pressing its hand against the glass. The surface shivered, and suddenly I felt its palm against mine, cold, electric, alive. My chest tightened, my lungs burned, not with drowning, but with something else, with longing. "You were never a witness," it whispered. "You were the door." Images flooded me. Every drowning, every whisper, every sin confessed. I saw the lake not as water, but as a mouth, swallowing guilt, feeding on silence. And I was its tongue, its chosen speaker, the bridge between the living and the drowned. I wanted to pull away, but the mirror pulled harder. My reflection leaned in, its smile stretching impossibly wide, and for a moment I thought it would step through. Then I realized it wasn't stepping through. I was being pulled in. The stone frame shook, cracks raced across it like lightning. The drowned stirred around me, their eyes turning, watching, waiting for me to cross. I pressed my free hand against the glass, struggling, but the surface bent inward, swallowing my arm, my shoulder. Cold fire licked at my skin, searing yet sweet. I felt myself unravel piece by piece until my face touched the glass. And in that final instant I saw the truth. The mirror did not show who I was. It showed who I was becoming. The glass shattered, darkness poured through, and I screamed. Not with my voice, but with the voice of the lake itself. Episode 14, The Voice Within. When I rose from the lake, the villagers thought the offering had been accepted. They fell to their knees, weeping, thanking a God who had never answered. They did not understand that I had not been saved. I had been claimed. The water clung to me long after I stepped onto the shore, sliding down my skin as though reluctant to let me go. My mother tried to hold me, but when her arms closed around me, she recoiled as if burned. She swore she heard me whisper something into her ear, though my lips had not moved. That was the first time I realized the voice was no longer outside. It was inside me. At first it came as a hum, low, steady, constant. When others spoke, I could hear it threading beneath their words, twisting them, translating them. I knew what they feared before they confessed it. I knew the sins they carried before they whispered them into prayer. Then the voice began to answer in my throat. Late at night, I would wake with my mouth open, words pouring out in a language I didn't know. My mother found me kneeling beside the bed, praying in that tongue, though my eyes were wide and unblinking. She tried to shake me, but the voice only grew louder, drowning her cries. By day, it followed me in silence. I could no longer look at water without hearing it breathe. Puddles, wells, basins, all shimmered with reflections that were not mine. And when I blinked, I saw flashes of the drowned, faces gasping, lips mouthing words I would soon speak. The villagers began to avoid me. They crossed themselves when I passed, whispering that the lake had left its mark, that I was neither living nor drowned. Children stared, then fled when I looked back at them. Even my mother began to pray in secret, hiding her rosary beneath her pillow. But the voice was never hidden. It filled every silence, stretched through every prayer, and it wanted more than confession now. It wanted command. One night, it guided my steps to the chapel. The ruined altar still smelled of damp wood and blood. I felt my body kneel, though I did not will it. My hands rose, fingers trembling as the voice poured out of me in waves. The bells tolled without touch. The pews shook, and outside the dead stirred again. I felt them answering me, not the lake, not the whispers, but me. Their hollow mouths opened, and my words filled them like breath. I was no longer just its chosen. I was becoming its vessel. When I looked into the broken mirror on the chapel wall, my reflection no longer grinned. It watched me with hunger, waiting, and in that moment, I understood. The lake had moved inside, and soon it would not just speak through me, it would speak as me. Episode 15, The Lake Without Water. At dawn, the screams began. The villagers rushed to the shore, and for the first time in living memory, the lake was gone. Not drained, not receded, gone. The basin lay bare, cracked mud stretching wide, its reeds withered, its stones exposed like bones beneath rotted flesh. No ripples, no fog, no reflection. The people fell to their knees, some in relief, some in terror. They believed the offering had worked, that the curse had ended. They sang hymns, their voices trembling with hope, but I did not join them, because I could still hear it. The voice had not vanished with the water. It pulsed in my veins, curled at the edge of my tongue, echoed in my chest like a second heartbeat. When I breathed, it breathed. When I blinked, it whispered. I tried to tell them, to warn them, but the words that left my mouth were not mine. They poured out like floodwater, filling the air with syllables no one could understand. The villagers staggered back, crossing themselves, their faces white with horror. Then the ground shook. From the cracks in the lake bed, hands began to claw their way out, not bodies, shadows of them. The drowned who had been swallowed long ago rose without water, their forms dripping with darkness instead of waves. Mateo, Lucia, Esteban, the bride, all of them walking, stumbling, yet their hollow eyes fixed not on the villagers, on me. The people screamed, fleeing into the hills, but the drowned did not chase them. They circled me, their mouths opening in silence, waiting. And then I understood. The lake had never been bound to the water. The water was only its veil. Now that it lived inside me, it no longer needed the basin to speak. I was the basin. I was the vessel. The lake had moved ashore in my flesh. I fell to my knees, clutching my chest as the voice thundered out of me, layered with 1,000 others. The ground split wider. The church bells tolled on their own, and every mirror in the village shattered at once. Confess, the voice commanded. The drowned obeyed, their mouths spilling secrets into the dry air, sins rising like smoke. Their words sank into me, filling me, until I was drowning without water, suffocating in the weight of every hidden crime, every buried shame. I tried to resist. I tried to scream, but when I opened my mouth, only the voice came out. The villagers who had not fled fell silent, staring in horror, because they no longer heard the whispers from the lake. They heard me. I was speaking with its tongue, and as my reflection cracked open in the broken windows, grinning with hunger, I knew the truth. The lake had not disappeared. It had spread, and it would never need water again.
Epilogue: The Whisper Beyond. The lake is gone. The villagers no longer speak its name. They live in silence. Fields abandoned. Windows shuttered, their prayers swallowed before leaving their lips. They believe the horror ended with the water's retreat, that the basin is nothing more than dry earth and broken reeds. But I know better, because the voice has not left me. It breathes when I breathe. It waits when I sleep. At night, I hear it spilling from my mouth though my lips never move, pouring into the still air like smoke searching for cracks. And when I wake, I find words carved into the walls, lines I never wrote, confessions I never spoke. Sometimes, I catch the villagers staring at me from afar. Their eyes are full of fear, but also recognition. They hear it too, though faintly, like an echo rising from a well too deep to measure. Children wake in the night crying, swearing they heard my voice calling them from outside their windows. It spreads, quietly, relentlessly. Last week, a merchant passed through the village. He left at dawn, pale and shaking, muttering that the air itself seemed to speak. Days later, word returned, in the next town. Whispers were heard rising from their wells, their mirrors, their own breath. The voice does not belong to the lake anymore. It belongs to everywhere. And I belong to it. Sometimes I wonder if there is still a part of me untouched, a corner of my mind unclaimed. But when I look into any reflection now, water, glass, even the shine of a blade, I no longer see myself. I see the inverted face grinning, patient, waiting for me to stop pretending. I am not the witness. I am not even the vessel anymore. I am the mouth. And soon, when the voice calls again, it will not rise from a lake or a grave or a coffin. It will rise from me, from us, from the throats of those who hear it and cannot keep it down. The villagers cling to silence, but silence is fragile. The voice will break it, as it broke me, as it broke the water. Because voices do not need a lake to be heard. They only need someone to listen. And you, yes, you, are listening now.